On the spring of 2019, a real estate agent in Millhaven, Kentucky, stood at the edge of a 65-acre property and told her client something she had never said in 14 years on the job. "I wouldn't." The land had been sitting empty for 11 years. The farmhouse roof had partially collapsed. The soil hadn't been turned since 2008. 3 separate buyers had walked away after inspection. The county had flagged it twice for code violations nobody ever fixed. 2 local farmers had looked at it, shaken their heads, and driven home. And the asking price? $47,000. For 65 acres of what everyone in town had quietly agreed was unsalvageable land. The agent said don't. The bank said think carefully. Her own mother said absolutely not. Claire Maddox said yes. And what happened in the 12 months that followed didn't just change Claire's life. It changed the entire town of Millhaven. This is that story. To understand why Claire did what she did, you have to understand what Claire had already survived. She was 38 years old when she bought that land. A former logistics manager for a mid-size manufacturing company in Louisville, she had spent 15 years moving other people's goods from one place to another. Efficiently, invisibly, without ceremony. She was good at it. She was well paid for it. She was completely hollow inside Ralph. In 2017, her mother was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease. Claire moved back to Millhaven, the small town in eastern Kentucky where she'd grown up, to help her father manage her mother's care. She took a remote consulting role that paid half what she'd made in Louisville. She told herself it was temporary. 2 years later, she was still there, and something had shifted in her. She had started driving on weekends, not going anywhere particular, just driving the county roads, looking at the land, the hills, the old farms, the creek bottoms and the ridge lines. She had grown up in this landscape and somehow never really seen it until she came back to it as someone who had been away long enough to miss it. One Sunday in March of 2019, she turned down a gravel road she didn't recognize and found herself at the edge of the Harlan property. That was what locals called it, the Harlan property. The Harlan family had farmed it for 3 generations before the last of them. Old Gerald Harlan, widowed and childless, had walked off the land in 2008 and never come back. He died in a nursing home in 2015, without a will clear enough to avoid a 6-year probate dispute. By the time the county finally got the title sorted and listed the land for sale, the place looked like nature had decided to take it back at speed. Claire sat in her car at that rusted gate for 45 minutes. Then she drove home and called a real estate agent. The inspection report was 31 pages long. Claire read every word of it at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with a cup of coffee gone cold beside her. The farmhouse was structurally compromised. The north-facing roof section had caved in, allowing 2 winters of water damage to the interior. The septic system was non-functional. The electrical wiring, what remained of it, was a fire hazard. The well had gone dry. That was just the house. The land itself had not been worked in 11 years. The upper fields, roughly 40 acres of what should have been productive Kentucky loam, were under a mat of invasive species, Japanese honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and autumn olive so thick the inspector noted that clearing it with conventional equipment would take months. The lower 25 acres, closer to the creek, had suffered significant erosion. Topsoil that should have been 8 to 10 inches deep in places had washed down to 3. Without intervention, the inspector wrote, that land would likely lose agricultural viability within another decade. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandmother would have said that land just needs someone to believe in it again." Claire said, "That's not really a financial strategy, Dad." He said, "No, but it's a start." She called the agent the next morning and made an offer. The first day Claire worked the land alone, she cleared an area roughly the size of a 2-car garage. She stood back and looked at what she'd done. Then she looked at the 64.5 remaining acres. She went home, took a shower, and did not sleep. Week 1, she hired 2 local men she found through the County Agricultural Extension Office, both semi-retired farmers, both skeptical, both willing to work for fair day wages while they figured out if this woman knew what she was doing. Their names were Earl Pitts, 61, and Danny Combs, 58. Earl had spent 30 years running a cattle operation before his knees gave out. Danny had grown up on a tobacco farm and knew eastern Kentucky soil the way some people know scripture. She called her father. They did not think Claire was going to make it. They said nothing about this because she was paying them, but they thought it. The first crisis came in week 3. Claire had rented a tractor and a brush hog to clear the upper field. On the second pass, the brush hog hit something buried in the overgrowth, a section of collapsed wire fencing completely invisible under the vegetation, and the resulting tangle destroyed the attachment and jammed the tractor's PTO shaft. Repair estimate, $3,400. Claire's remaining budget after land purchase and initial supplies, $9,200. She paid it, said nothing, went back to work. The second crisis came in week 6. A soil test of the lower acreage came back worse than the inspection had suggested. The erosion damage had created a pH imbalance in the clay subsoil that would require significant lime application before anything could grow there. The agronomist who ran the test gave her a look she recognized, the same look her real estate agent had given her in March. The look that said, "You might be in over your head." Earl Pitts, who had worked beside her silently for 6 weeks, sat down next to her on that tailgate. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You know what this land needs more than lime?" She said, "What?" He said, "Somebody who ain't going to leave." She folded up the soil report and put it in her jacket pocket. "Well," she said, then it found the right person. The upper 40 acres were fully cleared by the end of July, 16 weeks after she'd closed on the property. Not planted, not productive, but cleared, fenced, and tilled for the first time in over a decade. It had cost her every dollar she had and 2 personal loans she wasn't entirely sure she could service. But it was done. While Earl and Danny were clearing brush, Claire had been doing something else every evening after work. She had been researching. Not just farming, not just soil science. She had been studying what eastern Kentucky actually needed, what the people in towns like Millhaven were driving 45 minutes each way to find at larger grocery stores because it simply wasn't available locally. What she found surprised her. Millhaven had no farmers market, no local produce supplier for its 2 small restaurants, no source of pastured eggs or meat within the county. The elementary school cafeteria served vegetables trucked in from 3 states away. The food bank operated out of a church basement and relied entirely on donated canned goods. Claire had grown up here. She had eaten here. She had never once thought about where the food actually came from. She thought about it now. The plan she developed was not what anyone expected. She was not going to grow commodity crops, not corn, not soybeans, not tobacco, the things eastern Kentucky farms had always grown for distant markets that set the prices and took the margin. She was going to grow food for Millhaven. Specifically, a diversified market garden on the upper 12 acres, producing vegetables, herbs, and cut flowers for a year-round farm stand she would build at the road edge of the property, a pastured laying flock of 400 hens on a rotating system across another 15 acres, a U-pick strawberry and pumpkin operation on 8 acres timed to the school calendar and family seasons, and on the lower acreage, once the soil was remediated, a community plot program, quarter-acre sections available to Millhaven families for a nominal annual fee so they could grow their own food on land they didn't own. Earl heard the plan in full at the tailgate of her truck one August evening. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know the town's going to think you've lost your mind." She said, "The town thought I'd lost my mind in April." He almost smiled. "Fair enough," he said. "When do we plant?" The first seeds went into trays in September of 2019. Claire had converted the farmhouse's one structurally sound outbuilding, a former equipment shed, into a propagation greenhouse using salvaged greenhouse glazing she found through an agricultural surplus dealer in Lexington. Total cost, $1,100 and 4 weekends of labor. She grew the first season's transplants herself, starting with crops she knew had the highest margin and the most reliable local demand: salad greens, tomatoes, peppers, winter squash, sweet corn, and herbs. 200 varieties of cut flowers from seed catalogs she had worn the covers off of. Danny Combs, who had been hired for clearing work, had somewhere along the way become something else. He was now arriving before Claire in the mornings. He had opinions about spacing. He had pulled out a 50-year-old notebook of his father's planting records for that same county soil type and started cross-referencing it with Claire's plan. He had stopped thinking she wasn't going to make it. He didn't say this, but he stopped thinking it. The farm stand went up in October. Hand-built by Claire, Earl, Danny, and Earl's nephew Marcus, who was 17 and had no farming experience but turned out to have a gift for carpentry that none of them had anticipated. Claire paid him $60 a day, and he built her a farm stand that looked like it had been standing there for 30 years. She hung a sign above the entrance that said, "She kept the Harlan name deliberately." The land had a history that belonged to this town before it belonged to her. She wasn't replacing that history. She was adding to it. The farm stand opened on a Saturday morning in late October 2019. Claire had told no one except Earl, Danny, Marcus, and her parents. By 11 o'clock that morning, she had sold out of everything on the stand. By noon, 4 people had asked her when she'd be open next. By 2 o'clock, she had 3 voicemail messages she hadn't had time to listen to. One was from the principal of Millhaven Elementary School. One was from the owner of the town's only sit-down restaurant. And one was from a woman named Ruth Sellers, who ran the food bank out of the church basement, who had heard from someone who'd heard from someone that a farm stand had opened out on the old Harlan property, and who was calling, Ruth said, because she had been trying for 6 years to find a local produce source for the families she served, and she just wondered if there was any possibility of a conversation. Claire listened to that last message twice. Then she sat down on the tailgate of her truck in the empty farm stand lot and let herself cry for the first time since she'd signed the papers in April. By March of 2020, exactly 1 year after Claire had sat at that rusted gate for 45 minutes, the Harlan farm was supplying fresh produce to Millhaven Elementary School 3 days a week. The 2 local restaurants had signed seasonal supply agreements. The food bank was receiving a standing weekly donation of surplus vegetables and eggs. The U-Pick strawberry beds were pre-booked for the entire spring season before a single berry had ripened, and the community plot program had a waiting list of 31 families. Earl Pitts had stopped being an employee. He was now a partner. Claire had offered him equity in exchange for his expertise and his loyalty during the months when both had mattered more than money. He had accepted without negotiating. Danny Combs had retired officially from his part-time work and was now managing the laying flock full-time. 400 hens rotated across 15 acres on a schedule he had worked out himself on graph paper. Marcus, Earl's nephew, the 17-year-old carpenter, had enrolled in the agricultural science program at the county community college at Claire's encouragement and was working the farm on weekends. The town had not been transformed overnight. Towns never are. But something had shifted. The Millhaven Farmers Market, which had not existed in any form before Claire arrived, held its first session in June 2020, organized by the town council after 4 local producers, who had watched what Claire built, decided they wanted space alongside her. 12 vendors, 87 customers on opening day. The local newspaper, a weekly that had been running the same 4-column format since 1987, ran Claire's story on the front page under the headline, "The Farm Nobody Wanted." She framed it and hung it in the farm stand. Not because she was proud of the headline, but because she wanted people to remember what the land had looked like before. When people ask Claire what made her buy land that nobody else wanted, she doesn't tell the story the way you might expect. She doesn't talk about vision. She doesn't talk about courage. She talks about the drive. "I was just driving," she says. "I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't ready to start a farm. I didn't know how to farm, but I sat at that gate and I thought, someone has to believe this land can come back, and if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering why I didn't." She pauses. "I also thought $47,000 was an insane price for 65 acres, which it was. Even broken, especially broken. You don't walk away from that. What she built in Millhaven is not the largest farm in Kentucky. It is not the most profitable, or the most technologically advanced, or the most Instagrammable. But it feeds the town it sits inside. It employs the people who live around it. It put food in a school cafeteria, and a food bank, and on restaurant tables, all within a county that had stopped believing it could grow its own food. And it did all of that on land that 3 buyers walked away from, on land that an inspector wrote off, on land that 11 years of abandonment had nearly destroyed. There's a lesson in that, several actually. Here is what Claire wants other people, especially people sitting in their cars at the edge of something that looks impossible, to hear. First, neglect is not the same as death. Land that has been left alone is not land that cannot recover. Soil has memory. Given the right conditions and enough time, it comes back. So do towns, so do people. Second, the thing nobody wants is often the thing that's been waiting for the right person. Not the richest person, not the most experienced person, the most committed person. The one who will still be there in November when the season is over and the work is harder and the money is tighter and there's no audience watching. Third, community is not a marketing strategy. Claire didn't build the food bank donation and the community plots and the school supply program to generate goodwill. She built them because the land was there and the need was there, and it seemed wrong to let either one go to waste. The goodwill that came back to her was not the point. It was a consequence of doing the right thing in the right place at the right time. And fourth, the real estate agent was wrong. She was wrong. The Harlan property is not forgotten anymore. It has a name again. It has workers who know it by heart. It has families who bring their children to it on Saturday mornings and let them pick strawberries from rows they helped plant in community plots that didn't exist 2 years ago. It has soil that is slowly getting better every season. It has a woman who sat at a rusted gate in March and decided that somebody had to believe. Stories like Claire's don't make national news. They happen quietly, in counties with small weekly newspapers and town councils that meet in church fellowship halls and food banks that run on donated time and canned goods and the occasional miracle. This channel exists for exactly those stories. If this one stayed with you, if you found yourself believing in that land alongside Claire, hit subscribe. If Claire's story taught you something today, about land, about commitment, about not walking away from the thing everyone else gave up on, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. And if you've ever taken a chance on something nobody else believed in, drop where you're from in the comments. Let's see where this community reaches.